you can borrow tax-free like a billionaire now. You can get a windfall of money if you have equity in your home or rental property without having to sell that property. You borrow a chunk of tax-free cash and you can do whatever you want with it. You can spend it on anything from a boat to a vacation to paying off other debt in your life like high interest rate credit card debt. You could consolidate other debt. It's called a cash out refinance. The equity in your property, which is what it's worth, minus how much you owe, that chunk is a gain that you haven't realized, and there have been big gains in home equity over the past 5 years. That money is just sitting there doing nothing. In fact, billionaires do this by using their stock shares as collateral. You can do it by using your home equity as collateral, and it doesn't take much for you to qualify for a cash-out refinance. It all almost sounds too good to be true, such that describing it is even humorous in some settings. Watch this Trevor Noah clip about how billionaires borrow tax-free with their stock shares. Then I'll come back and we'll talk about how you can similarly do a cash-out refinance with your home equity and whether or not you should.
People argue that you cannot tax billionaires on the shares that they hold in a company because it is an unrealized gain, right? So they go like, yeah, you're worth 300 billion, but we can't tax you on those stocks because you haven't sold the shares, so you don't like have the money. Right, but you're worth the money, but you don't have the money. And I understand the argument. They go like, no, you don't have it. It's just what it's worth, because it could also crash, and then you have nothing, so we can't tax you on it. Then I'm like, okay, I understand that. So you can't tax the people on a thing because they don't have it. It's just there. Okay, fine. Then Elon Musk offers to buy Twitter, right? He offers to buy it. And then he says, in his offer, he goes, I'm putting up my Tesla stock as collateral. Then I'm like, so you do have it. Then he's like, no, I don't have it. I'm just going to say as collateral. So then they accept the offer. He now buys Twitter. Now that they've accepted his offer, he now goes to private equity and banks and like other rich people and whatever. He goes like, can you guys borrow me the money to buy Twitter? And then he's like, I want to buy Twitter because I don't want to sell any of my Tesla shares. So I want to use your money to buy Twitter. And then it's like, but then they're like, what are we loaning it against? And he's like, well, my Tesla shares. Then I'm going like, wait. So you can buy a thing based on what you have. Yes. But when we want to tax you, you can say, I don't have it. Do you hear what I'm saying here? And now, like, just think of like the illogic of it. It's like it's such a fun game that like billionaires get to play because all their money is in that, right? Like if you earn your money as a salary, that your money just gets taxed. That's it. You can't be like the IRS comes and you can't be like, I don't have that money. You can't be like, that money's in the bank. I don't have that money. What money? It's in the bank. Only when I take it out, then you can tax me. For now, it's in the bank, IRS. No, IRS is like, don't worry, we've got your PIN number. We'll handle this, right? But then if you have billions in shares, you can then use that as money to then get more money, but not get taxed on any money because you don't have money. And now, I'm not saying that you should tax people based on an unrealized gain, because I understand for a market and an economy that might be crazy. But I am saying it seems to me that you then shouldn't be able to use a thing that's unrealized as collateral.
Hey, well, let's learn how to borrow tax-free like a billionaire. I'm here with Ridge Lending Group President Chaley Ridge, talking about how if you have equity in your property, then much like a billionaire, borrowing tax-free against their stock shares, you can borrow tax-free against your property's equity and still hold on to that property while you enjoy the windfall. We just played the Trevor Noah clip about that, Chaley, and this is something that is not too good to be true. This really exists with what's known as a cash-out refinance. There are some pitfalls to avoid too. And Chaley, before we look at an example of how a cash-out refi works, what does it take to qualify for this?
So it's going to require debt to income ratio calculations. How much money do we show on paper versus how much your monthly liabilities are? Generally speaking, a 50% DTI is going to be the maximum to a cash out refinance. Credit scores, really as low as 620, depending on compensating factors. And then for an owner-occupied transaction, the reserve requirement is dependent on what we call an AUS, automated underwriting system. It could be 0, it could be up to 6 months. So it kind of runs the gamut. There's going to be a range there between qualifying markers, but pulling cash out is not nearly as intensive, I think, as a lot of people expect it to be.
All right, well, let's use some real numbers. Give us an example of how a cash out refinance works, let's say just with one's primary residence.
So you're probably looking, generally speaking, at an 80% loan to value. So to keep the math easy, if the value of the property was 100 grand for easy math, you can take 80% of that, or $80,000. If you have an existing mortgage, say of 50,000 already in place, we pay off the 50,000 and that would give you a $30,000 spread of
Okay.
available equity minus closing costs, of course.
Yes, that's right. So in that case, one could borrow a 30% chunk of their home's value, that much equity. They could take all in one lump sum, tax-free, still hold on to the asset or home, and use those funds for anything at all. There's no restriction on how one spends that money.
Absolutely not. Now, when we talk about deductibility of interest, the IRS code does say that the borrowed funds can be deducted, the interest on those funds can be deducted if used for investment or home improvement. If you're taking $30,000 to go and treat your family to a international vacation for 2 months or whatever it may be, then probably no, you can't deduct that interest. But otherwise, yeah. But there's no question about what you can use the funds for. That is entirely up to them.
Now, one might be thinking, gosh, in that example that you gave, I've got a $50,000 loan currently at a lower interest rate, and I would replace that with an $80,000 loan at a higher interest rate. And that's going to create a monthly payment that's substantially higher as well. But there is somewhat of a way around this. When you do your cash out refinance, rather than refinancing the entire thing, you can get a second mortgage and keep that first mortgage on that $50,000 in place at that lower interest rate. Tell us about that.
You can. A second lien HELOC is what I would recommend in that example. Different than a HELoan. A HELOC stands for Home Equity Line of Credit, which gives the consumer a lot more flexibility, right? They have this line of credit that they are only paying interest on the amount that's being used at that time. So let's keep using our example numbers. If there's a $30,000 line of credit and they're only utilizing 10,000 of that, the interest payment will only be calculated on the 10,000, but they have access to the full 30 if they need to. That is a unique way that individuals can still harvest a little bit of equity and then maintain that first mortgage and leave that in place if they're not keen to get rid of a lower interest rate.
All right, well, this is compelling. This is enticing. Getting a tax-free windfall, using your home as collateral, you can use that money for anything. But what are some of the risks or the drawbacks? Because that does create another monthly payment in one's life.
Yeah, I would say that the individuals that are looking at it like a revolving checking account might have some things to think about. Those that just see this availability of funds to go and buy a new speedboat or right whatever they desire. So make sure that you're budgeting and you have the financial wherewithal to repay whatever it is that you've got. I mean, if you're going to use it for investment purposes, I think you're going to be in a much better situation by having some kind of income to offset the new payment.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Keep in mind that your rate of return from home equity, that equity in your home, is always zero. I've talked about that extensively elsewhere. The short story is that your home's appreciation rate or depreciation rate has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of equity that you have in the property. And look, unlike a billionaire that has to go out and try to recruit various private investors to fund this, where that person has to put up their stock shares as collateral, like we talked about there from the Trevor Noah clip, all you, the property owner, need is one bank, and you have several banks probably that are ready and willing to fund you as long as you qualify using your property as collateral.
100%. And it's a very accessible way for people to either extend wealth or just having access to the equity in their house in a liquid way. Because otherwise, as you said, Keith, it's just trapped.
Yes, and there's nothing new or avant-garde or esoteric about what we're talking about here, a cash-out refinance. A lot of people just don't realize that this exists and that this is available. Shaylee, tell us about if one has rental property. You talked about how one can go up to 80% loan to value on a primary residence.
Yeah, on a rental property, you can go to 75%. You're going to get a little less leverage on a rental than you will on a primary residence in most cases. But even still, the same principles apply, except that on a rental property, you're going to have a little bit more option in loan qualification. So we go from the full doc Fannie Freddie loans, which will yield slightly better interest rates, to what would for investors exclusively be DSCR, where it's just about the property's income against the new payment and leveraging equity that way. So you have a little bit more opportunity on an investment property because you've got qualification metrics that are different. But overall, it's pretty much the same process. You're going to do the refinance, whether you're paying off the existing first or just attaching a second lien. All of those things are very commonplace in mortgage.
If you think that a cash out refi can benefit you and you can take a page out of that book and borrow tax-free like a billionaire, I'll just tell you, Ridge Lending Group there, which Shaylee is the president of, is where I get my own loans for my own property. You can inquire with them about a cash out refinance just to at least see if it makes sense for you. Their website is ridgelendinggroup.com. You can email them at info@ridgelendinggroup.com, or you can give them a call just like I do at 855-74-RIDGE. Shaylee, Ridge, it's been helpful. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate you.
You can watch this one next.